We are live with breaking news, an historic moment in the history of animal rights. This is a case that will go down in animal rights history, and there is some huge breaking news. In the trial of Tracy Murphy, case dismissed. Case dismissed. This case had caused a culture war. You are looking at protests outside her sanctuary, people accusing her essentially of being a cattle rustler. This happened way back in 2022. They wanted the sanctuary shut down. They were demanding, give the cows back, lock her up. At the heart of the case are these two innocent beings, two cows, who purportedly left a beef farm and went to her neighboring sanctuary in Newfane, New York. And she took them in, and the rest is the source of tremendous controversy. But today, a judge dismissed the case against Tracy Murphy. She could have ended up in jail for up to a year. She has been through hell for the last 2 years since this happened. So we're going to go straight out to Tracy Murphy. Your reaction, what ran through you when the judge dismissed the case today?
Just grateful, absolutely grateful. Grateful to my brilliant attorneys, grateful to all the people that have supported me and supported Asha, that believed in me, that stood by me for so many years. Just absolutely grateful. But Jane, at the same time, it's so bittersweet, because all that goes through my mind are those two little calves that innocently wandered onto the sanctuary, and who I provided shelter to and protected. And where I believe that the law would protect me and would protect those two beautiful individuals that deserved it even more than me. And that's what was going through my mind, that, although that I've been vindicated, that they were not able to participate in this vindication because they're gone. They're not here. And that's sad. But I'm grateful that justice has prevailed. And I hope this shines a light on these animals as being sentient, loving, deserving of care, deserving of protection, deserving of laws that protect them. I hope it shines a light on activists, that we deserve to be protected by the very laws that were made to protect us. We deserve that as well. And today, justice prevailed.
When you heard the words, case dismissed, or however that word was transmitted to you in court just a little while ago, what ran through your heart? What was your instant reaction? People do want to know that.
I was just grateful. I mean, that is how I felt. I felt numb. I wanted to burst out in tears. I wanted to just burst out in tears. That's what I wanted to do. And I had to keep myself together. I just had to keep myself together. It's surreal to me. I still can't believe hearing those words dismissed after all that, I've been through, the sanctuary's been through, the animals have been through, after all of the slander, after all of the smear campaigns, after having our funding cut, after having to rehoming, after having to rehome so many of the precious animals at Asha's Farm Sanctuary because we were losing finances because of the massive smear campaign that was going on. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God. I'm grateful to God who was inside me and kept me going and told me Do not take a plea. You keep going because I'm going to strengthen you. You keep going. And I did. And again, I was just grateful justice prevailed, for these wonderful, beautiful animals. And you're showing Ruthie, and you're showing Darsha, and you're showing Cheyenne. And it's all about them. It's all about caring about them. And now I can continue my work. I can continue my work. I can continue caring for these animals and hopefully rescuing more animals that need a sanctuary, and providing a safe haven for these beautiful, innocent animals. Look at them, full of life, innocent, loving. They don't deserve to go through torture and slaughter. They don't deserve to go through all these awful things that we impose on them. They deserve to be happy and to live, and they deserve compassion. All those things were going through my mind, Jane.
At the heart of this case is, are animals mere property, or are they sentient beings who want to live and cannot be treated as simply, a can went from one location to another? I mean, that's the heart of this case. I want to go to Nora Marino, who is an attorney in New York. What are your thoughts, given that at the heart of this case, the question is, did these animals vote with their feet to go to a sanctuary, or are they mere property that should have been returned without a second's notice to somebody who said, I own them?
Well, that is the question, and that is the big dilemma and a big fight within the law. In most jurisdictions, animals are nothing more than property, meaning that the desk that I'm sitting at is equivalent to a living, breathing, sentient being, which is absurd. And another thing, and you said vote with your feet, Jane. There was a case that I came across a few years ago dealing with an argument, a legal dispute regarding ownership of an animal. And it was a cat, and the cat literally went from one of the parties' homes to the other. And the judge in his decision awarded the family who the cat took himself to, he awarded them a possession of the cat, and wrote in his decision, the cat voted with his own feet, meaning that this judge was thinking, where did the cat want to be? And laws really are progressing somewhat, like in matrimonial cases, about the best interests of the animal as opposed to just strictly superior possessory rights. Regarding this case, I am shocked that this case went as far as it did in the criminal justice system. I mean, most times when there's a dispute of ownership of an animal, it's a civil matter. And I've dealt with so many cases involving disputes of animals and who they belong to. And the police always say that's a civil matter. And there's a civil legal doctrine called replevin, which is what we use to have the courts decide who has the right to that animal. But it's a civil case. And it's a little shocking to me as an attorney that this went as far as it did, that the district attorney even brought these charges. Now we're finding out that there was evidence that was mysteriously destroyed or missing, and the defense didn't have an opportunity to inspect the cows, which every criminal defendant has the right to inspect the evidence against them. There were so many things that were wrong with this and how it got to this point. And while I'm thrilled that this was dismissed, it should have been dismissed a long time ago.
Yeah, and if you're just joining us, the charges have been dismissed. In the trial of Tracy Murphy, she is free to go. She is no longer shackled. Believe it or not, this woman who you just heard from and you're going to hear from again was shackled at the waist, the ankles, and the legs. And that is something, this case has been sort of compared to the famous book, The Scarlet Letter, as the community turned against her and had protests. So let's give you a very quick backstory on this complicated case that had caused what the New York Times described as a major culture war in upstate New York. Essentially, 2 cows showed up at Asha's farm sanctuary in upstate New York. She took them in. She informed the SPCA. She cared for them. The neighboring beef farm owner went over to Asha's farm sanctuary a few days later and said, "Those are my cows, give them back." And she demanded proof of ownership. Then a few days after that, a whole bunch of law enforcement show up with a warrant. They execute the warrant. They take the cows. And here's why the case was dismissed, according to the judge. Despite a warrant that explicitly required that those cows, the prime evidence in the case, be provided to the court, they were instead given to civilians who took them to the neighboring farmer, who then sold them for slaughter. So the evidence in the case has been destroyed. If you're going to treat animals as mere property, then they are also evidence. And the evidence was destroyed before the case ever went to trial. That's why the judge said he thought the police investigators handled this horribly. Additionally, which is so shocking to me, the supervising law enforcement investigator in this case, who directed the seizure of the cows and was instrumental in Tracy's arrest, is the brother-in-law of the purported owners of the cows. Something that was just revealed on the eve of trial, literally just yesterday or the day before yesterday? I have to go back to Tracy on this. What is your reaction to the brother-in-law thing? Whoa.
My reaction is that it was hard to believe. I mean, you would think that, law enforcement officers, they know the law and they know better. And I can't believe that they didn't reveal that information. I can't believe that he just didn't remove himself entirely from the case. I'm just glad, Jane, that the truth finally came out like a couple days before trial. This has been going on for over 2 years, and the truth came out a couple days before trial. Thank God.
We've got several people here who are very excited to comment on the case. Everybody's going to get a chance. I want to go to Simone Reyes. Simone, you famously were able to help cows that escaped a slaughterhouse get adopted into famed songwriter Diane Warren's sanctuary. What does that tell you about cows? In other words, is it possible that cows are voting with their feet, that might sense, hey, I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere else? Or we know that's happened with dogs. We know that's happened with cats. There was a recent case where a cat traveled 800 miles to get closer and was ultimately reunited with his human companions. What are your thoughts on that issue?
There's no question. We know that cows can recognize between 50 and 100 faces. We've seen them mourning. They even sometimes mourn with actual tears. We have seen mothers running and screaming and wailing after their newborns are ripped from them. There's absolutely no reason at all to even consider the fact that they don't know that they're in a dangerous situation. The cows that I had rescued, I've rescued a number of cows. The cows that you're discussing came from Pico Rivera. 40 cows escaped that slaughterhouse, and we were able to liberate 2 of them. And in other situations, it's at feedlots and the auctions. There's no way that they don't know what's happening to them, and they know that they want to run for their freedom. What kills me is that when you have an animal that has gotten so close to being liberated, just like these cows, and then suddenly be thrown back into the horror of what their fate was originally, is just, it's so criminal. And when you look at the kind of press that we got when all of those cows escaped the slaughterhouse, the overwhelming majority of people were rooting for those cows. Now, these were people that eat cows. These were people that drink dairy, okay? But they were able to see the simple fact that we all want to live.
Well, you raised really the existential case underneath this whole case. Everybody wants to live. A can of soda does not want to live. But sentient beings want to live. How big a victory is this for animal rights? I want to go out to Tiffany Brunelli, who is a relatively new activist, but who has become a very, very active activist. As just a citizen and somebody who has sort of woken up recently to animal rights, what is your reaction and what is the significance of this case being dismissed?
My heart goes out to Tracy, and I'm just trying not to shed some tears. I'm so excited for her. And I don't know how many folks would keep up the fight. I was reading that she was offered a plea deal in the beginning, and she knew she did the right thing. I have a rescue dog, and I can't imagine if after a couple of weeks someone knocked on my door and said, that dog belongs to me. So I think this is huge, and congratulations, Tracy.
Tracy, you know, there is a huge difference in how society treats dogs and cats versus cows. And people can understand the concept of a dog going back to his or her human companions. I don't say owners. It happens all the time. Anybody who's been on Nextdoor knows that, oh, my dog came back, right? They accept the fact that dogs and cats can navigate that kind of situation and seek to go somewhere. The leap societally is, could animals who are cows actually say, I want out of here and I'm going to head out somewhere, and instinctively know that there is a place that they might go where they won't be ultimately slaughtered? Is that too big a leap for society today? Or has this historic moment in this case of your charges being dismissed opened the door to that possibility?
Look, Jane, I live with these cows. I have many cows at the sanctuary, and I can tell you, they can think. They can think ahead of time. They can think in the present. They know what their likes are, and they know what their dislikes are. Those cows absolutely knew that they were in an environment that wasn't truly a loving environment. And when I mean loving environment, an environment where their well-being mattered, that they would never be harmed, that they would never be sent to slaughter, that they would always be cared for, always be loved. And they can feel that. They knew that they weren't in that type of environment. So that's why they probably left. They left to explore. They smelled, and they must have smelled Asha's. And they came over and they walked over and they were on my property, and they saw me, and they saw that I wasn't going to cause them any harm. I mean, think about it. When they came onto my property, they didn't run from me. They weren't afraid. They came right inside the fencing, and I put them in the fencing to make sure that they weren't going to be hit by a car, run in the woods, get lost. They were clearly on my property, but they followed me in the fencing, and they felt safe around me. They didn't run from me. They knew that they were in a place that they were truly loved for who they are as individuals. These cows know when they're loved. And it's the same thing as a child. A child knows when they're loved. They know when someone truly loves them and someone doesn't. And it's just no different. It's no different for these precious cows. So absolutely, Jane, absolutely. They knew where to go. They went to a sanctuary where they could be safe.
This, if you're just joining us, will go down in history as a major moment in the animal rights movement, which essentially, one of the tenets of it is animals are not things. Animals are sentient beings, and therefore they deserve rights. In this case, these animals were treated as mere property. They left purportedly a beef farm And again, we invite anybody who's connected to this case on. I think this is more of a cultural argument as opposed to a discussion of anything that any particular beef farmer is doing. These cows appeared well cared for. This is not an abuse case in that regard, but we're talking about the sentience of these animals and their desire to live. And the entire case has been described as these cows wandered onto the sanctuary. The word wandered is used very specifically by the media. We've even used it, but are we going to open the door to these animals escaped and sought refuge at an animal sanctuary? And for those who regard that as fanciful or anthropomorphization, well, these are sentient beings. And we recognize that dogs and cats do these kinds of things. They're in the news all the time, returning to their owners after a long distance or escaping cruel situations. Societal leap of faith to allow the possibility that cows may have that ability to make decisions like that. Well, that is truly an extraordinary issue. And I think I have to go back to Attorney Nora Marino on this, because cows are considered property, but there are certain extra protections for quote unquote companion animals. Can you dive into that a little bit? And is it possible that when these cows, and I don't know the answer to this, appeared at Asha Farm Sanctuary, since she had no desire to slaughter them because her whole mission is to save animals from slaughter, that they somehow became companion animals, possibly theoretically in the eyes of the law at some point?
Well, that's an interesting point. And the animal cruelty statute in criminal, it's a criminal law, but it's in the agriculture markets law in New York State, which is a whole other ridiculousness. It should be in the penal code, but it's not. But the animal cruelty statute here in New York does have, it's a misdemeanor to inflict cruelty or harm upon an animal, unless that animal is a companion animal. And then it can be, the crime can be raised to a felony. But overall, animals in the eyes of the law are property, whether it's your dog or your cat or a cow or a horse or a chicken or a raccoon. I mean, if you bash a raccoon's head in with a baseball bat, that's going to be a misdemeanor because that's not a companion animal. If you bash your neighbor's dog's head in with a baseball bat, that can still be a felony. Another problem, though, is I rarely see these things prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which is why this case was so mind-boggling, because I see so many horrific situations go by where there's no prosecution or inadequate prosecution. And here you had someone who actually rescued two cows that they themselves wandered onto her property or ended up on her property. She didn't go out and seek them. They sought her land, they sought her refuge. And yet this woman is prosecuted for 2 years. This was just, mind-boggling to me why the DA went forward with this case, when in every other case, it's really a civil matter when you're discussing ownership rights. But, the bigger problem here is our philosophical view of animals, just that they are property and we can do with them as we please. And if someone owns an animal, they can kill them or sell them or harm them. And that's their right. And that's where we get into this philosophical discussion, Jane. It shouldn't be someone's right. And, when I was discussing this case with a colleague of mine, he had suggested that perhaps when the cows wandered onto Tracy's property, the neighborly thing to do would have been to return them. And, I thought about, well, what if those were two children that were coming from an abusive situation? Is it your neighborly duty to return those children to be beat up or sexually?
Well, wait a second. I got to jump in here and just make it very clear that there's no allegations that these animals were being abused per se. The owner of the neighboring beef farm says that they do butcher they sell the animals to be butchered. But he also said that up until that time, they are treated as quasi family members.
And
but that is the essence of, and again, we invite anybody who is in any way connected to this case, including that farmer, on any time to discuss. this is a cultural issue. This has nothing to do with what this individual was. This was a small family farm. I do not want to in any way telegraph that he was doing anything untoward. Everything is within the law in that situation. There's no allegation regarding that, except these animals are raised to be butchered ultimately.
Well, and that's the thing. I wasn't making that
No,
allegation. I was more using it just to demonstrate the point, though.
Yes.
Tracy, and we all know, if those animals were to go back to that farm, they would have been slaughtered, and apparently they were. I mean, that's what happened to them. They're not here anymore. So it is this philosophical difference in our perception of these sentient beings. Do we as a culture have the right to just raise animals to kill them? Do we have the right to imprison them? Do we have the right to enslave them? Do we have any of these rights? And this is the entire essence of the animal rights argument. I mean, I don't think we have the right to do that to any sentient being. And of course, cows and pigs and chickens and dogs and cats can think, like Tracy said, in the present, in the past, and they have their likes and their dislikes, and they recognize people and things that they like and don't like. And I have no doubt, in my opinion, that these cows absolutely knew that there was some impending fear, and they felt safe on this property. I mean, doesn't that account for something? Shouldn't the law shouldn't that account for something in the law and our overall perception of animals? And hopefully, step by step, we will get there. And I think the dismissal of this case today is a wonderful step in the right direction.
Wow. Simone, you had some thoughts. You were nodding your head.
Well, I do think it's a really good sort of, I think it gives us some hope, because what we're seeing here is common sense. Right. What we're seeing here in the judicial system, which is never the case, it seems, for animals, is that these animals did want to have freedom, but the person who was trying to give them freedom was doing nothing illegal. Almost anyone that cares about animals at all in the same situation, when faced, and that's the problem, right? We're never faced with these situations typically, but when we are, I think a lot of people would have a really hard time letting animals that escaped from a situation that was going to result in a death or in their deaths to just hand them over and say, okay, sure, you can take these animals and you can kill them, even though they came to me, they came to my property in order to have sanctuary. I think almost anyone. So we're starting to see that now reflected, right, in the law, or at least in the judicial system, where judges or even juries we've seen, are starting to see that it's not black and white. It's not cut and dry. It's not property against, non-property. The fact is that people, if given the opportunity, I have to believe, or else what are we all doing here as animal rights activists? If they actually have a personal connection where they see an animal in person that has maybe come to them for sanctuary or come to them for help, then they are able to see that animal as an individual, as a sentient being, not as a commodity, not as a product, and be able to act on that. And the fact that we're starting to see that in the halls of justice is something that we have to hold on to and we have to celebrate, because every win for an animal only means that there's going to be more, right? That's why when we do legislation with our group, Social Compassion, once we pass a law in California, it's such a thrill because we see it copied in all these other states. And that's because once you do it, in a huge place like California, right, the 5th largest economy, it's easier for other states to follow suit. And I think that might be the case also when it comes to these situations in the law or in courtrooms, or at least I hope it is.
Yeah, and there was a report way back. This all started in 2022. Let's play a local news report, courtesy Channel 7 News, to get a sense of how this all erupted.
These posted signs dot several neighborhoods in Newfane calling for the return of cows that are now living here at Asha's Farm Sanctuary, where protesters are also calling for their return to their original owner.
People are protesting against Asha's Farm Sanctuary, and they're trying to say that we are, cow rustlers. and that means stealing cows, and that is not true. They wandered on to my property.
Tracy Murphy is the president of Asha's Farm Sanctuary. She's been running this safe haven for farm animals for a decade. She tells me these two cows, which she named Little Willow and Ishmael, showed up to her sanctuary around July 16th. She says she called SPCA the same day she found them wandering around.
The alleged owner called me about a week later after the report with the SPCA, and I talked with the owner.
That owner is Scott Gretson. He owns a beef cattle farm not too far from the sanctuary. He tells me he went to feed his cattle one day when he noticed they were gone.
We looked for them and we were advised on the following Friday by an SPCA investigator that they were located in an animal sanctuary. I do know where they're at, but I can't comment on the case any further.
Gretson has been raising beef cattle for almost a decade. He says his children are wondering when the cattle will come back home.
We raise them to butcher. However, during the process, they're here for 2 years. So you do get attached to them. I know for some people it may seem funny, but you know, they come up to us, we give them noogies, we pet them.
As for Murphy, she says she hopes she can come to an agreement with the owner.
We're willing to waive any boarding, and we're willing to give them top dollar, for these animals.
We didn't really want it to go this far. We didn't know it was going to blow up to be this type of situation. All we want is our cattle back home.
I reached out to the Niagara County Sheriff's Office. A spokesperson says the office can't comment on an ongoing investigation. Jocelyn Person, 7 News Newfane.
We thank 7 News Newfane for providing that video. We invite the beef farm owner next door on any time and would love to dialogue with him and hear his side of the story, or anybody else connected to this case. But that gives you a really I thought it was a very well done, having been a local news reporter once years ago, I thought it was a very well done report that lays out the case. So given that, the problems erupted after the law enforcement went to Asha's sanctuary, seized the cows with a search warrant, and arrested Tracy. It turns out that Mr. Gregson was, at the time, I don't know if he still is, a New York State trooper. And this is why the case fell apart at the eve of trial. Jury selection was supposed to be today. Despite a warrant that explicitly required that the cows, the prime evidence in the case, be provided to the court, they were instead given to civilians who returned them to the neighboring beef farm owner, and they were ultimately slaughtered. As a result, defense attorneys have been unable to inspect the alleged stolen property, as is their right in a theft case. Then it turns out the supervising police investigator was the brother-in-law, according to published reports of the gentleman you just heard from, the beef farm owner. So the brother-in-law is going in there with a search warrant and arresting Tracy. I just find that, how did this get so far? I would love to, possibly, Tracy, I would love to, first of all, get your thoughts on what we've just discussed, but also I think one of your attorneys is there, because this is really a legal issue where it boils down to a brother-in-law shouldn't be going in and executing a search warrant, A, and B, if you are going to say animals are property, then they're evidence, and you can't return them the way you can't just return them. They're evidence that were supposed to be stored in a secure and safe location.
What I would like to comment on for this, okay, is that these state troopers were mandated by a court order, once they seized those cows, that they were to return them to the court, and that the court was to decide what to do with them. And that would have been putting them in, safekeeping, for the duration of the proceedings, the legal proceedings, or my trial. Had law enforcement followed the law that they should be adhering to, that they take an oath to follow this law, had they done that, those cows, little Ishmael, little Willow and Ishmael, would be alive today. Because what would have happened is it would have probably ended up in civil court. It probably it probably would have done that, and these guys would have been given to us, and they would have been able to live their whole lives out at the sanctuary. But because this law enforcement did not follow the law or my constitutional rights of for my attorneys to be able to examine the evidence, and I hate to call the cows evidence because they're living, breathing beings. That's what happened. They would have been alive today had they followed the law, Jane.
I want to give some other folks here. So many people want to weigh in on this case. It is such a huge, when you look back in history, this will, I predict, be a turning point in animal rights. But there's, I would like to go to my host, Unchained TV host, Michelle Celestino. What is your reaction to this news that the case against Tracy, 2 years in the making, was dismissed on the morning of jury selection?
Well, first of all, I'm elated that Tracy is free. But overall, I've been very frustrated and angry because this is an egregious miscarriage of justice from the get-go. They dismiss it now, and they've prolonged it for 2 years. She's been going through torture and misery. And I truly believe with everything that's happened, it was being vindictive. There's no reason for it to have gone this far. And as far as what it means to the animal rights movement, even though all of this has transpired, I really believe this helps the movement because the awareness and the fact that all of these different media outlets, which we've talked about before, Jane, we struggle to get coverage on anything. They're on the New York Times, they're on local news. People are talking about it because it lasted so long. There's awareness now. And Simone was right. It's like the more victories, the more you move the needle, right? And I believe that cognitive dissonance, even when the neighbor, the accuser, the beef farmer was talking about how, they're treated well for two years, and then I was reading in the New York Times, it's like they're fattened up and then slaughtered. And he's like, we even give them noogies. That cognitive dissonance that they don't get, that they're sentient, loving beings. I also wanted to bring up the fact that, recently in the news, there was this story about the 8 bulls that escaped from the rodeo, right? And all 8 of them joined together to leave. They want to be free. They want to have their freedom. And we as human beings need to eventually recognize that there's that connection. They're sentient beings. And do we have the right to impose our will over them? No, I don't believe so. But I'm really happy for Tracy.
Really good points, Michelle. And it again, we invite the beef farmer, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of beef farmers on. This gentleman, honestly, also sort of fell into all of this, and we invite him on to dialogue and respond to anything that was said at any time. This is really principles above personalities. I don't feel that anybody here harbors any kind of a grudge toward any individual per se. It's really a philosophical difference. And ultimately it's a consumer issue. If people are saying, who are watching, oh, this is terrible. Well, if those 2 cows were consumed as meat, they were certainly slaughtered for meat ultimately, and somebody ate them, or many people, because when you eat a hamburger, for example, at a fast food joint, it's processed, and it could be hundreds of animals, the body parts of hundreds of animals mixed up in one hamburger. So these animals were essentially consumed for food. So at the heart of this is, if you're consuming animals for food, that's really the issue. All these other folks, well, they're in a cultural world where that is the end result. Okay, so the issue is far bigger than the issue of any individual doing any one thing. It's a culture war, as the New York Times put it, and wrote a big article. And I certainly hope the New York Times follows up and does an article on case dismissed. So I want to, I'm understanding that Tracy, I would love you to come back, but scooch over because there is an attorney, your attorney, who wants to speak. And I would love to hear some of the nuances. While you're doing that, I want to go to Akhil. Akhil's been waiting very patiently. And I asked him actually to be, I hope I could say, an artificial intelligence engineer of some sort, very well-educated and wonderful young man who agreed to go to court today to play reporter because we wanted a reporter in court and we couldn't find one. So thank you, Akhil, for your patience. And I hope you didn't have to take off work today. But I would like you, since you've devoted your whole day to this, to give us a sense of what was like at the courthouse and what your reaction as somebody who loves animals was to this news.
Absolutely, Jane. So I am a local animal rights activist at Buffalo, New York. This morning was kind of a bit of an emotional roller coaster for me and the 25 or 30 or so supporters of Tracy who came to the courthouse this morning. It started off a bit tense. We were all hopeful, but obviously tensed. But very quickly, at 9:15 or so, Wayne, who's famous for the Sonoma County trial,
Yeah, we all know him. He's a famous animal rights activist. Yes.
Right. He came out of the courthouse and kind of unofficially told us that they're going to dismiss the case. We were all cheered. I can describe the environment in 3 words: claps, cheers, hugs, and maybe a 4th word: tears. A bunch of us were in tears. Tracy was as well. But after that, they were all called into the courthouse again. And moments later, like in 5 minutes or so, they officially declared that the case is dismissed. We saw like 30 or 40 jurors go out of the courthouse. We were all relieved. And then we can see the smiles on everyone's faces. We all hugged, we cheered. It was a great day, to say the least.
I want to say thank you for just literally dropping everything to go to court as I asked you to, because we needed somebody at court. Thank you, Akhil, and really appreciate it. I want to go now out to an attorney for Tracy. And sir, tell us your name, because she had quite a legal team. I didn't get your name listed, but tell us why you think this is a significant victory. What is the significance of the victory?
Yep. Hi, nice to be here. My name is Louis Mazzari. I'm obviously one of Tracy's attorneys, and she did have a significant legal team. She had a really talented legal team, and it was a pleasure working with them. Justin Rousseau, Wayne Chung, all the other support people who were involved were absolutely incredible. Now, the significance here is a firm statement. Tracy didn't do anything wrong. She held her conviction right through the end of trial, and she was willing to take the ultimate risk on that. You know, being a defendant in a criminal case it's burdensome, and it's very hard to do, and to put up with the stress and the pressure that is a result of it. It affects her life. It affects her, everything she does. And she knew she didn't do anything wrong, and the law supports her. There was no intent to permanently deprive anybody of animals, and the law was on her side. And what's significant here is it's a success for Tracy. It's a success for animal rights, but it's also a success for the Constitution. Police or government action, you can't come and take property and not follow the requirements that you have to comply with. And here, if you're going to execute a warrant, you've got to do a warrant return, and you've got to make the property that's available for inspection by the defense. It's basic criminal law. And in this case, it wasn't done. There were some improprieties that affected the case, and they all cumulatively weighed in Tracy's favor. So we did get a dismissal ultimately. That's one of the reasons, but I'm just as confident if we went to trial and finished the trial, we would have been successful because there was no criminal intent. This should have been at most a civil matter. And just Tracy's an incredibly strong person to put up with this for 2 years, to have signs outside her house disparaging her. It's a lot for some person to deal with. And, you know, I wish every client I had as much grace and dignity as Tracy has throughout this process. It's been wonderful to represent her and wonderful to work with this team.
And I'm very curious, and we'll ask her in a second, but how she plans to move forward, given that these were a lot of people who live in her neighborhood. And in fact, I want to play a little clip, and then I'll go right back to you, of when I interviewed Tracy after her gag order was lifted, because she was not only shackled at her waist, at her ankles and her legs, but she was also gagged. And then her gag order was lifted. And here's what she had to say about how her life was upended.
There is a lot of turmoil that goes on inside. I have strong faith, which is giving me a solid foundation. I can't help what's going on. I can't help what people think. I have no control over what people do. It's difficult for me because, you know, I can't go to the corner store like I used to. I can't go get coffee 5 minutes away. You know, I have to, if I do any shopping, it needs to be further away from the town. You know, I really can't call anyone locally to service our sanctuary like I could before. There's a lot of animosity, and I get yelled at over the phone. People believe what is written in the news, which is a lot of misinformation. There is so much misinformation in the news, and they believe that. And so it hasn't been good. But Jane, the one thing I just want to say is that I don't harbor any ill feelings whatsoever. I just really want to go on with taking care of the animals. I want to go on with providing them care and letting them live out their entire life at our sanctuary.
So do you still feel that way, Tracy? Do you hope to mend your relationship with the community now that all charges against you have been dropped?
Jane, what I want to do is I want to continue with the sanctuary work. And that is taking care of the animals that we've rescued and providing them the refuge that they desperately, desperately need and the medical care that they need. That's number one. I want to be able to rescue more animals that need it. There's animals that need rescue all the time. And I want to be able to work with law enforcement to be able to help these animals and offer them a safe haven. Because, I mean, if there's animals in a cruelty case, where are they going to go? Go to a farm and then they're eventually slaughtered? No, they've been through enough. Let them go to a sanctuary. Let them live out their whole lives at the sanctuary. And so what I would do, you know, is I would want to do that. And then I would invite the community to come see what we're doing, that we're helping animals. That's all we're doing. And let's start repairing relationships. And let's just focus on these beautiful, wonderful animals and, you know, giving them a chance to live a beautiful life that they never would have had. And as I said before in my other, you know, interview, I don't hold any animosity whatsoever. I love my neighbors. I always have loved my neighbors. I continue to love my neighbors. And I just hope that, you know, they come, you know, to the sanctuary to see the animals.
You know, that's an incredible testament to the kind of person Tracy is. Better than me. She's been under this sort of pressure and stress, and her message is consistent. It's a message of hope, forgiveness, and moving forward and mending bridges. Look, she was in shackles. I've dealt with cases where people are alleged to be murderers. I've dealt in cases where people are alleged to do horrible things. They're not brought before the court in shackles. Sure, handcuffs occasionally, but here, this is a non-bailable offense, and she's brought before the court in shackles. And yet her message as she sits here today is just as consistent as it was a year ago when she was under this pressure. And I don't know how she does it, but it's just so evident that there's no spite, there's no vindictiveness. This is just a woman who cares for animals and wants to provide care for animals. That's all this is. Let's strip all this away. This is somebody who wanted to provide compassionate care to animals. And you can tell it comes from inside her heart. She's a wonderful person.
You know, it really is a philosophical thing. If, for example, I'm a vegan, somebody offers me meat, I've said, no, I can't, I don't want to eat that. To force me to do that would be a violation of my rights. Your philosophy, akin to a religion, in some cases, there was a man who went to court in England and got veganism made a protected class akin to a religion in England. Essentially, for you to turn over those animals would be a violation of your moral beliefs akin to possibly a religion. Is there any legal argument to be made there that somebody should not be forced due to their beliefs to do that? I mean, I think that is the heart of the case. Somebody else might have taken those cows and seen them as property and returned them, not her. For her, it would have been the ultimate violation of every belief she has, her core beliefs. Can you address that as a lawyer, Louis?
Well, here, the situation is easy to address because she established a lien law. She had the right to care for these animals and she wanted proof of ownership. And so we don't even really get to that question in terms of like a religious belief or not. Here, it's simple. She was supported under the law. She was supported under the law. And the case would even show that there was a call from the alleged owner indicating that she should hang on to the animals for a few days more until he could get around to meeting with her. That's acquiescence. That's the confirmation that they're in her care and custody, and that's creating the lien that she had. So like I said, we don't quite get to that question here because she was completely in the right in everything she did. She didn't have any intent to permanently deprive. So
I guess the big question is, what is the takeaway for the animal rights movement? We have, for example, the Non-Human Rights Project that goes in and tries to establish a basic fundamental right for elephants, for gorillas, for other animals, for example, who are being held in those prisons called zoos. And they haven't quite gotten that. I believe it's called habeas corpus. I'm not an attorney myself, yes. But do you feel that this advances animal law at all? And I want to go to Nora Marino on that for a second, a New York attorney who is with an organization that fights for animals in court.
Yeah, it's the Legal Action Network for Animals. Thank you, Jane. You know, it's a tough call how far this case will actually take the philosophy of animal rights, because this case was dismissed based on mishandling of evidence. It was an evidentiary issue. Louis can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding. And I just have to comment, the fact that Tracy was shackled is so shocking and so over the top unnecessary. These charges were ultimately reduced to a misdemeanor, and you have someone shackled at their ankles and waist is just absurd to me. But just getting back to your point, how far this case will take the animal rights movement is really questionable, because it was an evidentiary issue. It was a procedural issue, which the dismissal was based on. The case in California, the right to rescue cases, they may take things a little bit further. And I'm hoping that in the big picture, this will be perceived as some form of a right to rescue. And I'm talking about public perception, not anything within the law as to how this case was ultimately decided or dismissed. But I'm talking about public perception, which plays a big role in the evolution of our laws over time. And if you think about it, 50 years ago, if someone suggested that gay people could get married, that would be just astonishing and unbelievable. And now it's just completely accepted commonplace law. So laws do evolve over time. This case, the dismissal, like I said, was evidentiary in nature, but I'm hoping that it will have that effect on the public perception of animals and in the right to rescue realm. I mean, Tracy saw these animals. They wanted refuge. They wandered onto her land and she took care of them. And as Lewis also mentioned regarding the lien, that's completely a civil matter. That doesn't even belong in criminal court. So this whole thing was just handled very oddly, in my opinion, and improperly, in my opinion, from the shackles to the charges to the proper forum being in a civil forum, in my opinion, as an attorney who's dealt with animal disputes before. But, you know, we can only hope now that this will affect the public perception. I just do want to comment on something Michelle said, though, which I also found very disturbing, just listening to that interview. And, you know, and I agree with you, Jane, it's not the individual, it's a public perception, but just, oh, we care for these animals. My children wanted them home. We play with them. We give them noogies or hug them. And then just having no issue with then sending them off to their deaths. I just find that disturbing within humanity. I'm not attacking this particular individual because it's way bigger than him and it's way more widespread than just him. It's just this perception in humanity, and it's disturbing. And I just hope we get further and further away with that with each one of these cases and each one of these acts in the law.
And that
Well,
note's
yeah,
important.
I want to just stress that we can't blame him for a cultural phenomenon. Anybody who might say, yeah, I agree with you, this is, well, if you're eating a hamburger, you're the ultimate reason why this is happening.
Right.
I mean, it's a consumer issue at the end of the day. And, you know, so I think that is what it highlights. And I didn't mean to interrupt. Lewis, what did you want to say?
I just want to say that we feel that that point would have been very revealing to the jury. That particular interview would have demonstrated just bad faith. It just isn't an honest effort. And you're right to pick up on that. Yeah, it's a problem with humanity, sure, but it's also just, it shows right away at the heart of this that there wasn't good faith on that actor. So we think a jury would have absolutely not been happy with that comment, saying, oh, these are the kids' cows, we love them, we can't wait, they really need them back. And then mysteriously they're sold for slaughter. Apparently a month later, which we found out for the first time 48 hours ago. So
yeah, and we invite the beef farmer on. Again, this is not an issue of, it's principles above personalities. There's thousands, maybe more than thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of beef farmers. This is a cultural issue. I think the New York Times called it a culture war, and that's exactly what it is. And so where is the culture when it comes to this issue? You know, we all love our dogs and cats, and any mention that anything might be happening to dogs and cats, although many dogs and cats still are horribly abused in our society, but the general population is in love with dogs and cats, and not so much cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, goats, and lambs. So there is a definite split there. And this case really highlights this culture war that is occurring. And I'm really excited to introduce Wayne Shung, who is the founder and president of Simple Heart, also on the legal team for Tracy, and someone who is a renowned animal cruelty investigator and attorney and animal rights activist. Wayne, what's the big picture here?
The big picture, first of all, is I'm just really happy because I have been with Tracy for the last 2 years. And I remember the first phone call we had, just the amount of stress and anxiety in her voice. It was a phone call, so I couldn't give her a hug. But my first thought was I just really want to give this woman a hug because she's terrified. You can understand why. It is not just that she was jailed and shackled merely for giving care to 2 cows who wandered on her property. There were dozens of people, including a demonstration, over 100 people, yelling, lock her up outside of her home. Someone who drove onto her lawn, death threats all over the internet, people doxing her, coming to her home and threatening her, people showing up in the middle of the night, terrifying this woman, all because she tried to help 2 stray cows. And one thing we haven't talked about is why. How did it escalate to this? How did it escalate to the point that she was initially charged with grand larceny, a very serious felony charge? How did it escalate to the point that there are over 100 people with megaphones screaming, lock her up outside of her home? And part of the explanation for that is corporate influence. So there is a very prominent defender of animal agriculture by the name of Forrest Lucas, who is one of the richest men in America. He runs an organization called Protect the Harvest, which is an anti-animal activist organization that has been spreading disinformation about my client for the last 2 years. They posted on social media so many times about this case, and it's really interesting when you see the language that a lot of the protesters are using against Tracy. Even when you see the language, there was a federal congresswoman, Claudia Tenney, who came out in public shortly after this case and condemned vegan extremism threatening Niagara County. It is eerie how similar the language put out by Protect the Harvest press releases resembles the language of the congresswoman, resembles the language of law enforcement, resembles the language of even the protesters outside of her home. And so this is really not about Niagara County, because I actually think when we've had real conversations, and I've seen Tracy have real conversations with people in Niagara County, when I've had real conversations with people in Niagara County, most people are pretty supportive. They're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Because after all, Tracy has been an asset to this community. There have been a number of animal cruelty cases where they would not have been able to enforce the laws of the state of New York if not for the fact that Tracy Murphy stepped up to help out. Because the local shelters don't have capacity for cows. They don't have capacity for pigs. And you can read about this in the news. There's a case involving 50 plus emaciated, starved animals where law enforcement came in. They had no idea what to do with these starving, in some cases, already dead animals. And Tracy stepped up and took the animals into her care. So most people actually know the facts about this case and know Tracy Murphy, know that she is not just a good person, she's a hero to the animals in the local community. But one of the reasons this went south is because corporate influence came in. They saw this as an opportunity to use this woman to demonize the entire vegan movement as extremists. And they tricked a lot of people into mobilizing against her. But the second thing I want to say, just big picture, and I think everybody should be concerned about corporate influence because we have these billionaires and millionaires distorting our politics in ways that are incredibly disturbing across the entire nation, not just on this issue, but other issues. But the second point I want to make is, and this is why I agree that the specific legal issue in this case was not an animal rights or animal personhood issue. Nonetheless, I think this is an incredibly important right to rescue case because even in the face of this incredibly powerful force, Forrest Lucas, Protect the Harvest, a federal congressperson calling my client a vegan extremist, we won partly because of a concept called jury appeal. So the idea behind jury appeal is technically we won because of an evidentiary ruling that excluded evidence of the cows. But I will tell you, sitting in that courtroom, one of the reasons the judge and the district attorney decided we can't move on with this case is they realized when the jury heard all the facts, when they heard that this rancher had called his brother-in-law to act as almost like a private mercenary to raid Tracy's sanctuary and seize these cows, when they heard that all the text messages between this rancher and law enforcement suddenly disappeared. Where did they go? Aren't police officers supposed to protect their communications and preserve their communications with complaining witnesses? Normally, they keep all these records. They're writing all these depositions. But somehow in this case, they all disappear. And most fundamentally, when they actually heard the story, and we had Gene Bauer, Schuster Rosenberg, a lot of the legends in the animal rights were prepared to testify in this case. When they heard the story of a woman who not only put her own blood, sweat, and tears to help these animals who were desperately in need of help because they were stray, they were on a dangerous road. It was a hot summer day, and there have been some hot summer days because of climate change over the last couple of years. And they found out that this woman had these animals torn from her and killed a month after she herself was arrested and shackled in jail. The jury would have been outraged. This case had no jury appeal. And the reason that makes this a right to rescue case is it teaches us and it teaches our entire society politically, if not legally, politically, morally, that even the most powerful forces in this nation, even the richest men in this country, when they go after someone, even someone like little old Tracy, a small sanctuary in upstate New York, trying to care for some cows, they cannot win because Tracy is acting with her heart. She might not have the money of Lucas Oil. She might not have the power of Lucas Oil, but she's acting with her heart, and that has power.
I have to say, we invite Lucas, Protect the Harvest, or anybody you mention on at any time to respond to anything you said. We would love to dialogue with you. Wayne, what is the potential legal benefit of this case to the animal rights movement? We know that organizations like there's numerous organizations, Animal Legal Defense Fund, et cetera, have been trying to establish certain legal rights for animals. But look at it from a human perspective. There is a man named Jordi Casamajana, who happens to be a writer for Unchained TV, who established veganism as a protected class in England akin to a religion. And that was a lawsuit. Here, Tracy has beliefs. Her belief against killing animals for any reason, and that is akin to a religion, one might say. And so for her to have handed over the cows would have been for her to violate her most sacred core values. Is there a legal argument to be made that, for example, veganism, like it is in England, is a protected class, and that applies to situations like this where the law is saying you have to do X, Y, Z? Am I out of my mind, or is there something there?
So I have to defer to my good friend, Bruce Friedrich, who actually wrote a law review article on this exact subject, that just as we protect various other spiritual and philosophical beliefs, we should protect and respect a philosophical and spiritual belief in animal liberation, because it is a belief based on a commitment, a moral commitment that all sentient beings have the right to be free. And that should be a belief system that's respected. I should also say, another one of the attorneys on this case, Professor Justin Marceau, has litigated a lot of these First Amendment issues. And you're absolutely right, Jane, in saying that the beliefs we hold, these deeply held values that animals deserve to be protected and not killed and tortured, these are beliefs that should receive First Amendment protection under the Constitution of the United States. Now, the reality is that often doesn't happen. And again, the reason it doesn't happen isn't because the law on the books doesn't protect us. It's because the law on the books is very different from the law of the street. And so when you ask, what is the legal value of this case? Even though technically this was not a legal ruling in defense of animal personhood. And let me just say that for all those of you who don't know, the recently deceased Steve Wise, a legendary animal rights lawyer, is really the reason a lot of us are doing the legal practice we do. But while this case was not technically an issue, a case involving animal personhood, the political reality is when you're able to win against all the political and economic forces we were going up against, the effective precedent of this case, the next time a prosecutor or a law enforcement officer is thinking about going after someone for merely trying to give care to some sick, injured, or stray animals, they will have to think twice, because they will realize this case has no jury appeal. It has no jury appeal. The community will not get behind you if you try to put someone like Tracy Murphy in jail.
This is an excellent question from one of our viewers, and it really is, I think, a very essential question. Will there be a countersuit regarding, well, the very reasons why the case was dismissed, the mishandling of evidence, and also the personal relationship between the beef farmer and the law enforcement officer who executed the search warrant or supervised the execution of the search warrant and the arrest of Tracy Murphy?
I will have to defer to my client and also suggest my client not comment yet because we haven't even had time to celebrate yet, folks. Give us some time to think about this case and take a breather. But look, at the end of the day, I know Tracy's primary concern is getting back to helping the animals. If there are other things we can do to ensure this legal system enforces everyone's constitutional rights, and that includes the animals, because the animals have constitutional rights too. And if you don't believe me, I've written about this. But we'll have time to think about those broader subjects on a later date. Today, we're just taking a breather and celebrating the fact that my client's free.
You know, it's so extraordinary because I did talk to you, Tracy, prior to this case, just really more scheduling than anything else. Could we speak to you after the trial? And you had mentioned to me, well, I could be taken away. I don't really know who's going to take care of my animals. I've had to give a lot of my animals, you know, give some of them to other people because of the, let's face it, hate directed at you. Some people are afraid to go to your sanctuary. I even want to play a clip of what you told me during the midst of all this when the gag order was lifted, really the emotional, I would have to say, torture you've been enduring, to the point where a lot of people were like, why don't you just move? Here's your answer.
The sanctuary's been built from the ground up. When I moved here nearly a decade ago, there was nothing here, absolutely nothing. All the fences have been built. All the barns have been built. We have a beautiful educational center that is in near completion right now, that we have been building for years, since 2016. We've been raising money and trying to get grants and donations for it, and it's near completion. So if we were to relocate the sanctuary, how devastating that would be for us. All these things that we've built. And so that's why I want to stay. I want to stay, and I want to take care of the animals, and I want to continue this mission of caring for of having people see that these animals are just like individuals. They're loving and emotional, and they deserve our protection. And I want to just continue that mission.
Really heartbreaking, brings tears to my eyes. It really, wow. So I just want to say, for those watching, Tracy isn't going anywhere. I mean, I'll let you speak for yourself, but now that you have had all the charges against you dismissed, remember, originally it was a felony case. You could have gone to prison for 7 years. You were shackled, you were gagged. And we spoke to you in the midst of all this once the gag order was lifted, only because your side went to court and said it was unconstitutional, was the gag order lifted. So your work is going to continue. Those who wish to, please, you can donate to ashasfarmsanctuary.org. The work is incredible. We've got video of some of the animals that you take care of. These animals have nowhere else to go. So where are you emotionally, given that that was really during the midst of this hellish 2-year ordeal where you had experienced death threats, where people were afraid, even people who support you, they were like, I'm afraid to go over there because I don't want somebody to come after me. Where are you now, and how do you hope to basically move on?
I'm here just wanting to get back taking care of the animals. Simple as that. This is Princess Starsha, and this is Cheyenne. And I'm wanting to provide them care and provide them love and provide them refuge. So that's never changed. That's been what I've been doing for the past decade, what I've been doing the past couple of years, and what I'm doing now. And I just want to get back to taking care of them. And I want to get back to having people come onto the sanctuary and meet them and do the guided tours again, so they can see how emotional and loving these animals are, and they're no different than a dog or cat, and how, Joseph, the steer that we rescued that couldn't even get up, he was injured, he couldn't walk, how now he can walk against all odds. And how the moment he sees somebody, he walks up to them and licks them and says hello. These animals are great. These animals are wonderful. And I want to get back to caring for them. I want to get back to people meeting these wonderful animals. And my hope, as it's always been my hope for the past decade, not the past decade, the past 20 years since I became vegan, is that these people will see, wow, I didn't realize I could be friends with a cow. I didn't realize I could be friends with a sheep. I didn't realize I could be friends with a goat. And I don't want to eat my friend. I don't want to eat my friend. I want to be compassionate towards these animals. And then we just want to be able to show people how you can do that. And that's what we do at Asha. And Jane, that's all I want to do is get back to what we were doing before. And that is showing compassion towards these animals.
So again, if you want to donate, Asha's Farm Sanctuary, the website is right there. Wayne, you know, the New York Times did an article on this, a major article talking about the culture war, given the protests that had occurred. And I'll show a little bit of those protests outside of Asha's farm sanctuary. When this case erupted, it got global attention. The neighbors were essentially saying, you know, you're a cow rustler, return the cows. And this is a very deeply agricultural community. Some were calling for Asha to be shut down. Two questions. How can she heal and move forward and, you know, let bygones be bygones? She said that she said just minutes ago, she has no ill will, harbor any ill will to anybody. What's her best way to move forward? And also, do you hope the New York Times does an article on the conclusion of this case? Because, you know, one of the things that Tracy Murphy complained about was that the news media was misreporting this case and not really giving her a fair shake.
Yeah. So with respect to the first question, I think the answer is really easy. How do you win over the community? Just show people who you are. And if not for the massive amount of disinformation put out on social media, people would have seen Tracy for who she is, and they would have seen her as a hero. Caring for animals is not the worst in humanity. It is the best in us. And I can say this as someone who's been acquitted in highly agricultural conservative counties myself, who's become friends with some of the jurors in those cases where I was acquitted, that even people in agricultural counties don't want to hurt animals. Why is Gregson talking so much about how he cares for the animals so well? Why is he talking about how his kids love the animals? Because animal welfare is an American tradition. It's not just an American tradition. It is a human tradition. It is something deep-seated in the human psyche that all of us want to do. We want to help animals, and that's all Tracy was doing. And as long as she can show who she actually is, someone who is just trying to care for animals, I think she'll win over her neighbors easily. With respect to the New York Times, I got to say, I was disappointed in the story. I didn't talk to the journalist for very long. I talked to him for a brief amount of time. He tried to paint this as a culture war, left versus right, Republicans versus Democrats, urban elites versus rural kind of farmers. And that's just not true. It's a divide that is false, that is often propagated by the media, by powerful industries that want to divide Americans. The reality is, survey data shows very conclusively that 80% of Americans believe even farm animal cruelty, this is not dogs and cats, farm animal cruelty is a personal moral concern. And you know what, Jane? It is one of the few issues in American politics that is bipartisan. Republicans support it at a 77% rate, Democrats 83%. So overwhelmingly, there are very few issues where overwhelmingly 75, 80% of Americans say they like what Tracy's doing. And so the New York Times not only should write another story, frankly, I think they kind of owe her an apology for trying to portray this as a divided issue and a community in conflict, when really this was corporate propaganda demonizing and targeting an innocent citizen who was only trying to do the right thing and was helping her community until this controversy erupted.
So in terms of moving forward in the animal rights sphere, you had mentioned, of course, that you've been prosecuted. We showed some images. Here you are in the famous Smithfield case, which also was in the New York Times, where you were prosecuted for taking out this little piglet. A couple of piglets were taken out, and you were acquitted. And then there were cases where there was a case recently where you were convicted, but each case moves the animal rights movement forward. You had mentioned Stephen Wise, and the name I was thinking was the Non-Human Rights Project, which tries to get habeas corpus, I believe, for animals. What is the essential, if we have to boil it down to what needs to happen for animals to be considered more than mere property in situations like this, where they purportedly left a beef farm where they were ultimately going to be slaughtered and ultimately were slaughtered and went to an animal sanctuary? What has to happen for animals in those situations to have more rights than they do currently?
Jen, I'm going to give you an answer that is very different from most animal lawyers, probably including an answer that's different from what Steve Wise would say. And it's based on something a federal judge, a very famous federal judge named Richard Posner, who was one of my professors in law school told me. And what he said to me is, there's the law of the books, and then there's the law of the street. And the real law is the law of the street. And what he meant by that is, there's a lot of pieces of paper that men in robes write down. They publish them in various books. They put them in various websites. But the reality is, in a democracy, law is written by the people, not by people in robes. And that means every decision we make has an influence on the law. And so, for example, this idea that we have to get new pieces of paper published, new things written down to achieve animal rights, that is one strategy. I'm not saying that there isn't merit to doing that. But the reality is, if we just interpret the language that already exists in the law in a more reasonable fashion. So, for example, under the Humane Slaughter Act, 99% of the animals who are eviscerated and tortured and killed in slaughterhouses are completely exempted because the USDA has decided that chickens are not animals. That is inconsistent with second-grade biology. Yet that is the reality we live in today. And the reason that is the case is because the public does not agitate and say to the USDA, hey, those animals you're allowing to be scalded alive, to be ripped to pieces alive, those are animals too. I learned in second-grade biology, a chicken is an animal, and that's not okay. But more fundamentally, the argument I've made, and I still think that this has to be developed more. So I'm not saying I'm the expert in this because it's a relatively new idea for me, is the idea that animals are persons. Under the US Constitution, no one may deprive any person of their life or liberty without due process of law. And a few generations ago, I wasn't a full person. My parents came to this country in the year 1971, 6 years after the Immigration and Naturalization Act, for the first time in history, banned all racial discrimination in immigration. And so they were allowed to come to this country. 150 years ago, you and Tracy were not full persons because you didn't have the right to vote. Despite the fact that the Constitution said that all persons and citizens should have all the privileges and immunities of citizenship, you were denied your full personhood. And we have to get to the same place for animals. And a huge part of that is not just lawyers writing things on pieces of paper. It is ordinary people saying, this isn't right. An animal is not a thing. And you, as a powerful government official, as a law enforcement officer, coming to my sanctuary and telling me these cows are just things, I know they are not things because I have looked into their eyes and I see there is something there. And it is when all of us rise up and say this, we agitate, we fight for that idea, that is when the law will change. So do not let lawyers and judges tell you they have authorial rights over American democracy, because the entire point of American democracy is that we are the ones who write the law, not the corporations, not even the legislators. Fundamentally, it is us as people.
And what both of you have in common is that you've both been willing to get arrested. I put up a photo a second ago, and I'll put it up again, of you being arrested at one of these open rescues, and your leadership in the Right to Rescue movement. So that is the movement that is making the case. This is a slight deviation. It's a slightly different set of circumstances, but the overall umbrella is that there should be a right to rescue these animals. Absolutely fascinating conversation. I want to thank Wayne and also Louis and obviously Tracy. This is a very big day for you, perhaps the most important day of your life. I just want to get a final thought from you, and then we'll go to our panel and wrap it up. I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us, and by extension, our viewers, at this crucial moment in your life.
I'm what I've been saying all day. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my attorneys. I'm grateful for Dwayne. I'm grateful for Louis. I'm grateful for Justin. I'm grateful for the entire legal team and everybody that has been supporting me and the sanctuary, number one. I just hope that the death of Ishmael and Little Willow, and how tragic it was that they were ripped away from a sanctuary, and tragically killed. Can you imagine a captive bolt gun going to these babies' heads? Mm-hmm. Can you imagine how afraid they were, how they were diarrheaing, they were scared, they were trembling. They knew that they were at a safe place, and then they were ripped away. I hope that people will have empathy throughout this and realize, yeah, they were at a sanctuary. They should have stayed there. They never should have been taken away. Why did it happen? And then in that, I hope that they give that empathy to all these other animals that are behind closed doors, that are suffering, that haven't had a chance to be named, like Little Willow and Ishmael. I just hope that people will just want to begin showing compassion to these animals and start to connect with them, that they're no different than a dog or cat. They're deserving of love and care. They're deserving to live. And really, that once they understand that they're going to say, I don't want to eat these animals, because ultimately that is the only way to help them. I don't want to eat them, and I'm going to find out how I can eat other ways and adopt a compassionate vegan lifestyle. That's the takeaway, that we don't need to depend on animal agriculture. We can eat plants that are healthy and good and delicious and wonderful, and we don't have to cause harm to these wonderful, beautiful beings. My hope is for compassion.
Well, I say this is a huge moment in the history of animal rights. We here at Unchained TV are very grateful for the opportunity to talk to you, Tracy, at this crucial moment. And thank you. You could be celebrating at some restaurant, and here you are talking to us about this issue. And thank you so much, Wayne, also for taking your time. This is obviously a big day for all of you. You probably have meetings, but I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And we're just going to get a wrap up from final thoughts from everybody here who has been here for the duration. So let's get a final thought from everybody before we wrap up our coverage. Michelle Celestino, you've listened to all of this. What do you have to say? Unmute.
Well, I have to say that I hope that things change. I think the key is the cultural shift and this awareness that these cases and particularly Tracy's case brings about. I think inherently people are good and they want to do good and they feel and they're compassionate. And I think it's bridging that cognitive dissonance and making that connection. And to see really what is happening and that the lives of these animals, they're sentient beings and they're just like you and me. So hopefully this shift, I think the tide is turning.
Wow, the tide is turning. I like that. Tiffany Brunelli, your comments.
Yeah, I just want to, my heart goes out to Tracy and Wayne and Lewis and Justin, and I hope that this does move the needle in a legal precedent, that we don't see more DAs wasting taxpayer money to continue to support big ag. So thank you all.
All right, and we're going to go to Akhil, who's probably supposed to be at work doing artificial intelligence magic, but has taken the day to be with us. Akhil, your final thoughts.
Yeah, so one silver lining I see in the case is that it shows how much strong the vegan community is. This morning I saw people coming from Rochester, Boston, California. They don't have to come here support Tracy, but they did anyway. It invigorates our passion to rescue animals, fight for animals, and I'm really glad that we all got together. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, our lawyer in New York, Nora Marino. Your final thoughts.
Final thoughts. We're all thrilled for Tracy and her legal team. I just want to say, we think that the cows, pigs, and chickens and goats and lambs aren't different than our dogs or cats. I don't think they're really that much different than us, and our dogs and cats aren't much different than us. We are all beings with intense emotions. We experience happiness and sadness and jealousy and envy. I mean, I've had dogs where one dog was clearly like a little jealous of the other dog or envied the other dog. Their emotions are all the same. It's their way of communicating that may be a little bit different, or they don't get up and put on a suit in the morning. But these are minor differences. The inherently who they are inside, I think we're all just sentient beings. And just to comment on what Wayne said about the law on the books versus the law on the streets, I think the laws from the books or from cases is a reflection of the laws in the street. So when you have public outrage, when you have public protests, when you have a movement, the laws will generally eventually reflect that. The laws should be a mirror of society. And Wayne's absolutely right. The people should be dictating these laws. And there are so many studies where the huge percentages, the majorities of people, are good, as Michelle said, and do want what's right for animals and don't want to harm animals. I mean, there's that old saying, if you have a baby and you give the baby an apple and a rabbit, the baby's going to eat the apple and play with the rabbit, not the other way around. So inherently, we do love animals. So hopefully today's case and many other cases to follow will slowly move the needle in the right direction, and animals one day will be free from this harm.
And there's somebody, I think, who agrees with you entirely on your statement. And this is Little Wednesday, one of my rescues. All right, Simone Reyes, you get the final word.
Well, as somebody who's had the honor of being able to negotiate out cows from slaughterhouses just this past year, my friend Libra Max and I were able to get 14 cows out of a kill pen. I have personal experience getting to know cows and getting to understand how similar they are to every other animal, especially to our companion animals that we have in our homes, usually dogs and cats. But to everyone else who's vegan, animal rights activists, I just encourage them to tell the stories that they have, whether it's that they've visited a sanctuary and they were, saw the way that the cows recognize each other and the way that they interact with each other, or even if they've never met a cow and they've seen the videos of mother cows, wailing and following their newborn calves, in a desperate attempt to keep them safe and to get them back. Whatever the story is, we have to keep moving the needle forward to show that a cow is no different than any other companion animal that they would probably take a bullet for in most cases. We just have to keep telling their stories so that people can relate to them as sentient beings that are similar to the animals that they share their life with, to the animals that they often credit for saving their lives. So I just encourage everyone, you don't have to be negotiating out animals from slaughterhouses, although I encourage you, if you can, please do so. Just any experience that you have, continue to push that agenda, which is that all animals are the same and that they have so much in common with us as humans, everything that matters, the ability to love, the ability to feel pain, the ability to feel tortured, the ability to be scared, the ability to embrace life, which is their God-given right.
Wow, beautifully said.
Well said.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. This, I believe, is a day that will go down in history. Let's remember that Tracy Murphy could have taken a plea deal, and she refused to on moral grounds. Now, we never know exactly what days are going to go down in history. If you think of moments where Rosa Parks did something or Gandhi did something, it's in looking back that one sees the huge import of that moment. But I'm going to take a guess and say this is a major leap in the struggle for animal rights, because Tracy Murphy went through 2 years of hell and she walked out a free woman, case dismissed. And if anybody from Newfane is watching, I only can say, please, she has no hard feelings toward anyone. She just wants to save animals. Let's move on, be neighborly, embrace each other, and move the world forward. Again, I invite anybody mentioned in this broadcast on anytime. We would love to dialogue with you. And signing off for Coexistence. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time here on Unchained TV. And if you haven't downloaded our app, I urge you to do so. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We have mostly volunteers who make this happen. We are considered the CNN Netflix of animal rights, and we need your involvement. So join Unchained TV.
So it's a vegan Netflix. Okay, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I love Unchained TV.
Unchained TV. Your life will change. It's just that easy.
Unchained TV has all sorts of content for everybody.
Unchained TV changed my life.
Unchained TV is crushing it.
I love Unchained TV. Unchained TV is my go-to.
Unchained TV. Who knew?
Unchained, baby. Yay.